Good day and welcome to Marriage Encounter. It is a delight, as always, to be with you, whether you're on the airways or whether you're viewing on SLC Adventist. We welcome you today and trust that as we go into this discourse that you will find the information we present meaningful. We hope that your marriages are doing well, and like we like to say, if they're not doing well, if you have hit a rough spot, you have tuned in to the right place, because here on Marriage Encounter, we have useful information that will help to bring the broken pieces together again. With me, Dr. Greene, is Dr. Braithwaite. Welcome, Dr. Braithwaite.
Thank you, Dr. Greene, and good day, friends. We anticipate and look forward to joining you every week as we share, and we are so happy that you're here with us today. We trust that as we share, as we discuss, that you will be blessed, and again, we invite you to call somebody, let somebody know that Marriage Encounter is on.
Well, we begin today with a word of prayer. Almighty Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity and privilege to share with our friends in Radio Land. We present all the marriages before you today of those who are listening. We ask, oh God, that you will give wisdom and help that the words that we speak, the ideas presented, will prove meaningful in transforming lives for you. Take full control of today's discourse in your precious name. Amen. 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 Well, we have been for the last few weeks discussing boundaries in marriage. We are using as a resource, Doc, the book Boundaries in Marriage by Cloud and
Cloud.
That's right.
Yes. Yes.
And we are having a good time sharing because these are very important principles.
Absolutely.
When we were here last time, we were talking about the matter of protection. Mm-hmm. You know, we used the illustration of fences.
Yes.
And we said around your property, you may have a fence, or at the minimum, you may have a door to lock your property. Mm-hmm. And you do that to keep out the bad guys.
Yes.
But it is able to open so that the people you want can be let in.
Right. And we definitely tied that to our relationships. We indicated that, it's important to have protection for your property. Likewise, it's important for you to have protection for your relationship. And there are times when you may need to raise that protection or close that door if for some reason your spouse is stepping across a boundary line. And there are times when you can let it down when things are the way they ought to be. And we also indicated that boundaries are set up in discussion with each other. And so it's a useful part of managing relationships. We believe that the more skills a couple has as they journey through the relational experience, it's the better it will be for them.
We went on to talk about self-control. And the point we made here is that you don't set boundaries on people.
Right.
You establish boundaries for your own safety, to demark your own property. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember if we made this point last week, but a boundary ought to be something that is enforceable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if I tell my spouse, you cannot do that, and my spouse proceeds to do it, then that really is not a boundary. Right. I'm trying to impose control on my spouse.
That person. Right.
Yes.
Very, very good point. Again, I'm not sure if we made the point, but you always have to be careful that, as you indicated, Doc, you're not trying to impose a boundary on somebody else. The boundary is really for you, and it's protection for you in the context of the relationship. Again, it's important to recognize that if you attempt to set a boundary on somebody else that's not enforceable, then it creates a problem. Like the illustration we used, the gentleman said, my wife can't leave home in that particular outfit or that particular dress. It's not enforceable.
That's
because
right.
It's a boundary that you're trying to set on somebody else, as opposed to, if she chooses to leave home in that dress, what do you do about that? So boundaries are really for you, they're for yourself, and they ought to be enforceable.
And when we talk about self-control, it's important for us to remember this principle. It's really all about love. Mm-hmm. It's not about controlling somebody else.
Yes, very
So it is not about selfishness. The matter of boundaries is not about selfishness. I'm not putting up this boundary because I just want to do my own thing and live my own life and nobody must interfere with me. It's about love. It's about how I can serve the other person better. And if I know what my own limits are,
yes,
I know how best to operate within those limits for the the positive impact of my spouse. And if I don't know where my limits are, I may very likely overstep my bounds. And whenever I overstep my bounds, then I create a level of discomfort for somebody else, this time my spouse.
Right. I think, Doc, what you just did is you created, the foundational principle upon which boundaries are established. And as you indicated, that is love. And that's why we've said over and over again that when we talk about boundaries in the context of a marriage, you ought to establish those boundaries together, a part of the journey of the things that you want for your family, for your relationship. You want those boundaries to be established on the foundation of love. It's all about love. It's not punitive, Doc. The boundaries are not in any way suggested or established for any punitive purposes. They're simply there to protect the journey of your relationship.
Well, why don't we go on and give some examples? Because there are some simple things that some of our listeners may say, really, I didn't think about it this way.
Right.
So some examples of boundaries. We have words.
Yes.
Things that you can use to establish a demarcation. And words is one of those things. How do we use words as boundaries, though?
Well, as indicated, we could consider words to probably be the most fundamental or basic in terms of boundaries. Words help us to establish who we are. They also help us to sort of communicate what's going on with us, And so when you use words as an example, as a boundary, if somebody is doing something that doesn't make you comfortable, overstepping a boundary, the first thing that you can do is say, I don't like that, or no, I would prefer you not to do that. And so words, are probably the very first or fundamental example of what a boundary is.
So they give utterance to what we really have in mind.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And you mentioned just now, you can say, I don't like that.
Yes.
I am not comfortable with this.
Right.
I don't really want to do that. I'm not interested. Listen, I'm not that type of person.
Right.
These are expressions that we can use to demonstrate that that's a boundary.
Right.
I am not going there. But equally, Doc, your lack of words can also portray something.
Well,
you're communicating to somebody who you really are and where your stance are.
Exactly. And maybe some persons don't recognize it, Doc, that, some persons feel like, I ought not to say anything because I don't want to create a fuss. But in not saying it, you're also communicating something. You're communicating to the person that what they are doing to you in some cases is okay. And that might be a bit disingenuous because the truth is that's not really how you feel.
That's right. Now, so the two things that I want to highlight here very quickly. Number one is that the boundaries need to be visible. A lack of words, lack of expressing or demarking makes your boundary invisible. Now, in your mind, it may be there, but if you don't verbalize it, if you don't let people know that this is where you stand, if there is a boundary and I don't know, if it's an imaginary line, I am likely to cross it.
Right.
I remember we were on a tour one time in Israel, and we were on the borders with Lebanon. And Israel and Lebanon are not necessarily the best of friends.
Right.
And they indicated to us that that's the boundary for Lebanon. Don't go near it. Don't touch the fence. It looks like a simple fence, but if you only go too near and you touch it, bullets will start to fire because there are people who are watching. So there was a boundary and there was signal. There was somebody saying, hey, this is where Israel ends.
Right.
Be careful not to cross over. If there was just an imaginary line, I sometimes, when I'm in St. Martin, there is French and Dutch on the same side. And I don't know when I move over from the French to the Dutch side because there's no concrete barrier between. So you're likely to overstep if it is not clearly demarked.
Absolutely. Very interesting. For the sports fans, one of the challenges of soccer, for instance, is the imaginary line that is created for the offside rule when the referee has to watch it. And over the years it
Excellent
has been so
example.
controversial
Yeah.
that they've now implemented the VAR. I think it's an electronic system that
Yes.
helps to make it clear or not. So sometimes when a referee makes a decision, the coach on the other side can challenge it, and they will have to go to the VAR, and that will determine. So, if the line is imaginary, you can sense that there will be some challenges. There'll be some conflicts.
And we therefore must help to remove the invisibility, so to
Yes,
speak, and to
yes,
make that visible by expressing that, well, this is where I stand. The second point I wanted to highlight from what you said, Doc, which is so very important. You mentioned that it is important that we communicate. That what you said was, when we don't say anything, we're also communicating.
Right.
And that brings me back to the principle of communication, that we cannot not communicate.
Right.
So when you refuse to speak up, to protect yourself,
Yes.
falling back in protection there again, when you refuse to speak up, to protect yourself, to demark where your boundary is, what is acceptable to you, what is not acceptable to you, you are in fact communicating that is okay.
Right. And, I think the point I want to highlight here is the fact that it is important for you to communicate adequately to your spouse what's really going on with you. Now, in terms of the principles of communication, Doc, we have said over and over again that, when you're going to have a communication, when you're going to have communication on a matter, sometimes, especially if it's a little challenging issue, there are some principles. Always choose the right time, make sure that the environment is right, make sure that the other person isn't tired, and so forth and so on. Because there is a time you may not choose to address the boundary immediately. I mean, you may not choose to, but you need to address that boundary. Sometimes you may need to gather your thoughts. If somebody did something to you at a point in time, you could have been out at a function, Doc, and you were having a conversation and everybody was joking around, and your spouse may have made a joke on you at the point with your friends that you may have been very uncomfortable with,
yes. Mm-hmm.
right? And you may want to address that, but you may not want to address it then and there. It might not be comfortable to do it. But at the point where you do set aside time to address it, as you work with words to communicate that information, it is important to do it and not to sweep it under the carpet.
Very important. When I moved into my community, I realized I didn't have a fence, and I realized I wanted to plant some things, and I wanted to have a little backyard garden. But I realized that there were horses, and they would come in and they would eat off whatever I planted.
Right.
So I decided, the two ways I can approach this. One, I could speak to the owners of the horse, which we in the community hardly know who they are, really. Or secondly, I can put up a fence to demark where my property is. And then, when my fence is up, the horses can't intrude.
Right.
So you have a property and you realize that somebody is doing something on it. You can, like you say, address it right away, or you can later on say, let me go to the hardware store, buy some wires and that kind of thing, and put up a fence at an appropriate time.
Yes.
And that's very important.
Yes.
That whether you're doing it right away, in some circumstances, it may be necessary for you to do it right away.
Yes.
Especially if it were not your spouse, perhaps, who is crossing the boundary, but somebody else, you may find it necessary to say,
immediately,
right away, let's settle this.
Stop. Do not do that. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, as I said, the point I was highlighting was the importance of getting it done. Right.
That's right.
Do not push it under the carpet, as we spoke about. We speak about sometimes when things are left undone, unmanaged, resentment can build, etc., etc. And what we're trying to do, one of the things that we like to say in premarital or marital education is keep your issues current, Doc. Don't let things slide, and don't let things, go unresolved for long periods of time. Address your issues, make them current, remain current. The worst thing that can happen is that, you're dealing with a matter and you have to be going back for 3 to 6 months to address issues from that time ago. Try to keep those issues current and address your boundaries at the appropriate times.
Well, if you don't keep them current, Doc, you may even forget them. So some of them may not be addressed.
Right.
And then later on, oh, I should have said this.
Right.
Yeah. Well, another example of boundary is what Cloud and Towson called truth.
Truth, yeah.
I like to call this, Doc, if I may, values.
Values,
I think it kind of says it a little better, perhaps.
Yeah.
But the idea here is there are principles
That's right.
that govern your life.
That's right.
And you ought to make those principles known. They must be known to you, and then you must be able to communicate them to your spouse in this case.
Yeah, but both of you, again, conversation, must have a clarity on the values that you hold dear to you, the truths that you want to live by, the values that you want to live by, they should, values need to come from somewhere. There are some universal, transcendental, I think that's the word, values that they stand the test of time. They are almost eternal, though. They're eternal values that, they transcend. I think that's what I want to say. They transcend, just the ordinary and the mundane. And so having a discussion about those values, maybe those discussions should have been had before you got married.
But most definitely, we keep going back to premarital counseling. And friends, for those of you who, we are aware that many persons listen who are not yet married. And from time to time, I have individuals saying, I'm listening for ideas, for tips. That's a very good thing.
Yeah.
But please bear this in mind. Before you get married, you need to prepare adequately. And one of the ways you can get good preparation is to find a competent individual who can give you good, proper, decent premarital counseling.
Absolutely.
The matter of values is something that should be addressed before you get married.
That's right.
Honesty.
Yes, that's it. That's one of those values that transcends just the mundane.
Sure.
That's something that's an eternal principle. You should be honest. Just recently, I was a young colleague of ours was talking to young people about some of the values that you want to establish or some of the things you want to know about a person before you get married to them. And he was making a point that you need to know that this person is honest. Is not a deceitful person, not a liar. And, if you're dating somebody who constantly lies, then that's a significant red flag.
And Doc, some people may think, well, honesty, everybody knows you should be honest. But in reality, there are lots of individuals who believe in what we term situation ethics, and may tell you, well, if I find myself in a drum, this is what I'm going to do. And there are individuals who are just not honest with the truth. Right. They are very economical with the truth. That's right. That's what I was looking for. One needs to not assume these kinds of things, but to have a discussion, to say, at all times in our relationship, we want to be forthcoming. We have encountered situations so often, Doc, where a spouse suspects that his or her partner is seeing somebody else, and they decide to be assertive and to confront the issue, and the individual says, no, that's not true, and they are swearing this is not true, case, I can show you this, call so-and-so, ask them, sometimes they even give the phone, call this person, find out so-so. And then, somehow or the other, something unfolds. And when that happens now, what you have done is that, if perhaps when your spouse first confronted you, you had said, yes, I slipped, that's the truth. It would have been so much better than for you to deny it and to
have to be found out later.
Exactly.
And so, that principle, that truth, honesty is so valuable in the context of it's a boundary, right, which you can establish. And again, that doesn't take a whole lot of working out. I mean, as I said, it's one of those eternal values that just stands the test of time. And so that's something you would want to incorporate in your relationship. There are other values, of course. We could speak about not committing adultery. We kind of alluded to it already. Loving each other, Those are, some truths that, you want to establish for your relationship. Regardless of what happens, we're going to express love. We're going to show love. We're going to love each other as the principle that is found in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13.
Now, some of these that we have identified, the matter of honesty, integrity, faithfulness, we may say, with the adultery, the matter of faithfulness to one's spouse.
Yes.
These general, we may say basic. Now, depending on who you are and your circumstances, there may be some other values that you want to incorporate in your life. And again, when we talk about the truths or the values, we're talking about intrinsic principles that are so meaningful to you that you are not going to change come what may. So your spouse may think it's okay to gamble.
All right.
Right? Now that can become an addiction for some persons. Right. And you have an aversion to that. So far as you're concerned, that is wrong, intrinsically wrong. And if you have a clash with your spouse on this particular issue, that can become a real challenge in your relationship.
It could definitely become a challenge. And establishing a truth or a value in that regard, maybe a bit of an onerous journey. Why do I say this? Because, let's say that, one person is in a marriage, one person is a Christian, the other person is not, all right? And this individual is saying, well, I don't share the same value as you. There could obviously be a clash. In a case like that, Doc, as you work through and work on a value, you may have to work a compromise.
That's right.
So to speak. So, you might want to say, okay, let's work a compromise. It's not my thing, but I can't, I'm not going to try to control you. But can we agree that if you're going to make that a practice, that you wouldn't go beyond maybe a certain amount? Does that kind of how does that work?
I think if you are already married, because there are two different scenarios. If you're not married,
but you can make a choice.
You can make a choice. Yes. And may I say a word to those who are not yet married?
Yeah.
We like to say the word compromise is good in the marriage relationship.
Right.
The context we're talking about is like the negotiating aspects,
That's right.
When you have differences of opinion, etc. But before you get married, if there's a clash of value, one of the things you have to ask yourself is, am I prepared to live with this for the rest of my life?
There you go.
And if your answer is no, and if you realize it's going to be very uncomfortable, now you may be in a state of dissonance. You may find that you're conflicted because you really love the person, but you can't tolerate this particular behavior. If you realize that this is not something that you think you can handle for the rest of your life, then maybe it's a good time to say, listen, we're going to need to end this relationship.
Right.
Because should you go ahead and get married, your spouse is likely later on to say, well, you knew I was like this before I got married.
Right. That's right.
And we discussed it and you married me like this. How do you expect me to now change it?
There you go.
But if in reality you're already married, and sometimes, Doc, we have these challenges because both of you may have been out there doing your own thing, and one individual decides to change his or her life, become a Christian, and then all of a sudden this behavior is distasteful to them. In circumstances like those, you're going to have to do some negotiation.
That's right.
Yeah.
You will have to make some compromises. It's not all or nothing. You can make some compromises, recognizing that there has been a change in our experience, and obviously in the context of that change, values will also be adjusted.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we're saying again, while we're talking here about the matter of boundaries, what comes into play is the biblical principle of not being unequally yoked.
Yes.
But we recognize that sometimes it's unavoidable because you make a decision after you're married.
Right.
And realize now I have stepped away from my old lifestyle.
Right.
My spouse has decided not to step away.
Right.
I have to be mature enough to appreciate the fact that that's where my spouse is. And this even highlights the importance of boundaries again, Doc, because
Very much.
I can't at this particular point say to my spouse, you have to establish different boundary lines.
Right.
You know, I have to respect where his boundaries are,
That's
or
right,
or her boundaries
But,
are, and
And the thing is, you are responsible for yours. So you can adjust yours.
that's
but
right.
you cannot adjust the other person's.
Precisely.
That's
And,
outside of your scope.
that's such an important point.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so to live with the understanding that some things are yours. That's when we started this discussion, we were saying some things are yours,
Right.
some things belong to your spouse,
Yes.
and you must be able to recognize what is yours,
And what belongs
act
to your
on what
spouse.
is yours, and respect what is your spouse.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well,
Powerful.
I think we don't have enough time to go to another one, so we're gonna have
We'll have to wait
we're gonna have to
till
wait
next
it here.
time.
But that last point, Doc, about the appreciation of the fact that your spouse may be different from you, especially when you made a change,
That's right.
is
That's
important for you to
Very important.
act with wisdom in that regard.
Yes.
Well, this is where we stay for today. We will be back next week again. Remember, you can write to us, Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That's Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. Until next week, same time, may God's richest blessings be yours.